Om Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Parampara. Om. Good. Be seated, please.
Just have to make a quick announcement. Will the owner of a black Tesla parked over here, right in front of the area that we need to move food into the side? What's the number there? It's T14ANZ, a black Tesla. Somebody own a black Tesla here?
This is our entertainment for today's program. Oh, very nice. Om Parameshwara. Thank you. Thank you both. Very good. All right. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunektu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Very nice. Good. Nice to see you all here. Welcome to you. Thank you for coming to make our anniversary celebration such a nice event. Pujas went on very nicely downstairs. And now, next part of our program is I've chosen a special topic for today, a topic which is at one time it's very spiritual, but it's simultaneously very applicable in your day-to-day lives. You've heard me speak many times about ahimsa, and you've probably heard me criticize the usual translation of non-violence, because if you don't kill anyone, don't run over anyone with your car, don't punch anyone in the mouth, are you a pious Hindu? You're not violent. You get my point. And you may have heard me comment before that the translation non-violence probably comes from India's freedom movement when Mahatma Gandhi adopted non-violent means of resistance to the British. So in a political context, non-violence is fine. But we're not talking about politics here. We're talking about how to live your life. And in that context, ahimsa means to live in such a way that you cause the least harm. And by the way, that's a literal translation also, just of ahimsa. Ahimsa can be translated as non-violence, but it is grammatically correct to translate ahimsa as least harm. To live a life of, let's be clear at the outset, to live a life of causing least harm is in your best interests. Ahimsa is not to protect, well, ahimsa is indeed to protect others from harm. It also protects you from harm, because whenever you get into a state of conflict with someone, some kind of fight, you hurt the other person. What does the other person do? They don't just stand there and let you abuse them. They hurt you back. The metaphor given in some Sanskrit commentaries is that of two wrestlers, these big, powerful guys, and they enter into the wrestling ring and they're fighting with each other. So wrestler A is holding on to wrestler B. Wrestler B is holding on to wrestler A. They're trapped. They are stuck in this confrontation, and they can't escape. And the longer they wrestle, the more they both get injured, right? That's how it works. I mean, there may be one a little bit stronger than the other, but it's an important point. Even the winner gets injured. And that's going to be a consistent point through our discussion today. Even the winner does indeed get injured. Okay, but we're not talking about physical harm now, because harm can be done by your limbs. Harm can also be done, and is frequently done, by what you say. And that's what we want to talk about today. The amount of harm that's caused by what we say is often under-recognized. And there's a story this is a story told by many teachers, not just Hindu teachers, Christian teachers, Jewish teachers, Muslim teachers. It's a famous story that really makes a nice point. And there was a child, and this teacher, spiritual leader, asks this child, the child was about 4 years of age, and asks the child, what hurts more, when you fall and skin your knee, or when someone says something bad to you? And the child responded immediately, what hurts more is when someone says something bad. The person asked, why? He says, the child said, because when I fall and skin my knee, mommy can kiss it and make it better. But when somebody hurts my heart, mommy can't fix it. What a nice story. Really makes a powerful point about how what we say can cause such deep harm. Of course, you've all experienced it. You know how it works. And one of the places that these harmful words come up most often is when we get into arguments. So imagine you get into, not just as kind of a quiet debate, but one of these highly emotional arguments. And by the way, when you get into those highly emotional arguments, how often do you win? If ever. Usually the arguments end up in a stalemate. But if they end up in a stalemate, or even if you win the argument, which is not likely, even then, you lose. You both lose, in the sense that both verbal combatants leave the contest bruised, emotionally bruised, frustrated, angry, hurt, even if you win, which you probably don't. Like, usually it's a stalemate. So you argue for an hour with someone, you end up at a stalemate, and how do you feel at the conclusion of that argument? You feel terrible. I suppose medically speaking, it gets your adrenaline going and gets the fight of the fight or flight response. The fight comes. And you've been fighting verbally for an hour. That doesn't just harm our emotions, it harms us physically to have our bodies flooded with that adrenaline and cortisol. Now, here's the irony. You know, when you get into an argument, you don't admit, but the fact is, you probably won't win the argument. You'll emerge at the end of the argument feeling bad, and yet, people love to argue. That's amazing. There's these very basic ironies in life. This is one of them. A good example of this is two 4-year-old boys in a sandbox. And one thing we know about children is their feelings are very easily hurt. Yet these two boys in the sandbox, one hits one with a plastic shovel, then the other one hits back, Then the first one hits, and the second one hits back, and this goes on, in spite of the fact that children's emotions are so easily hurt, they're pretty mean to each other. Is that not so? You know better than me. Most of you have raised children. I haven't, but I guess we all have the experience of being a child. Anyway, my point here is the irony of the fact that we know arguing is harmful. Harmful to others, and importantly, harmful to ourselves. And it's ironic that we go on arguing. One more point about harmful to ourselves. Do you ever have a problem meditating? Probably. Imagine yourself having an argument and then later in that day trying to meditate. How would that go? What would you be meditating on? On the argument. Oh, I should have said this. Oh, why did he say that? That's not there's a bad joke about that. That's not meditation, that is meditation. How's that? Because you're mad. Anyway. So let's come now to the irony that we love to argue in spite of the fact that arguing is ahimsa to the other and to you. Yet we love to argue more than anything else about two famous topics. What are the two topics that everyone loves to argue about? Politics and religion. Good, we're all on the same page. So let's talk about these two and a few others. The harm caused through such arguments. First of all, political arguments. It's no surprise that politicians argue with each other. Unfortunately, those political arguments usually involve two really nasty features. One is misinformation, today called disinformation, which is intentional misrepresentation of facts. The second and equally harmful thing that goes on in most political arguments is personal attacks. Disinformation plus personal attack plus two politicians. We've experienced too much of it. But there's a further problem, and a problem that affects you and I very directly, and that is these political arguments are mainstream. They're in the media every day. So look at this. When some people are going to be upset when I say this, but I have to say it. When the President of the United States uses misinformation and personal attacks in their discourse, this is recorded in media, we're all exposed to it, that leads to something sociologists call normalization. That is, we accept it as being okay. Why? Well, if that's done in Washington by the leader of our country, it must be okay. This harmful behavior gets normalized. And it's not too hard to see in your day-to-day life. Tell me, in the last 5 years, maybe 6 or 7 years, have people gotten more courteous in general or less courteous in general? Significantly less. That is in part due to the normalization of this bad behavior. And I don't mean to criticize any particular political leader, but what I've just shared with you, I think, is quite accurate. Harmful. So a good example of how argument causes harm, and in this case, really broad-based harm. Let me give another example that's a little closer to home, not necessarily in Washington. Some of you, unfortunately, have gone through the painful experience of being in a courtroom for a divorce proceeding or some kind of lawsuit, some kind of financial suit, whatever it might be. And that's another good example of even when you win, you lose. First of all, do you win the case, whether it's divorce or financial, whatever it is? 50-50, you might win, you might lose. It depends on all the details of the situation. But I'd like to suggest something a little different here. I would say even when you win, you lose. Because how long does that court case draw out? It lasts for months, maybe sometimes years. And during those months and years that the court case is going on, how does it make you feel? You feel anxious, you feel irritated, you feel whatever. And then you have to talk to your attorney now and then, you have to give a deposition and all of this stuff. It's not fun, right? And this is my point. Even if you win, you have to go through those months or years of dealing with all of this nonsense. A joke that's often made is the only person who wins, the only people who win in the courtroom are the attorneys. Win or lose, they get paid very well. They win, you lose. And if you find yourself in such a situation, maybe mediation is something to be considered to avoid all of that. Anyway, let's give even a more relevant example. Not in Washington, not in a courtroom. How about in your living room? That's pretty close to home. Suppose you're in your living room with your grown son or daughter. They're in their 20s, and they announce to you that they want to marry a certain person that's not on your list. And by the way, everyone has a different list, and whatever your list is, talking to the parents, I respect it. But here's the problem: if your list is too detailed, the person has to have this kind of profession, this kind of, from this part of India, speaking this kind of language, etc., Hindu, of course, and all of these things. And if any of these are not ticked off on your list, then what happens between you and your grown child? Argument. Not surprising, and some of you have gone through that. It's sad. I've seen families torn apart. You probably know that as well by these arguments. But we're missing something so obvious here. If your son or daughter loves that person, tell me, can your argument change who they love? Absurd, right? For example, what could make you stop loving your spouse or stop loving your children? Can you change? Instead of loving your children, I want you should love these poor refugees in Sudan. They're in bad shape, by the way. So it's absurd. We don't choose. Love happens to us, and we love who we love. So if you're arguing that you're loving the wrong person, what kind of argument is that? One more step. Suppose your son or daughter has fallen in love with someone of the same sex. It's the same argument. Exactly the same argument. You love who you love, and you don't choose who you love. Well, yes, some of you have had an arranged marriage, and you choose. That's absolutely the case. But we're not talking about arranged marriages now. We're talking about love marriages. In those loved marriages, It happens, you know this already. If you don't know it personally, you know it from watching Bollywood movies. Love happens to you. It's not a matter of choice. So, if your adult son or daughter chooses someone that you don't approve of, happens quite often, what possible benefit is there in arguing? Any benefit at all? I don't think so. Only causes harm. You don't have to like it. You don't have to approve. But you'd be really wise to understand the inevitability of the situation and the harm you can cause with your words. This happens way too often, which is why we're making a point about it here. Now, where are we going? Oh, what did we left one out. We said everyone loves to argue about politics, and what was the other one? Religion. That's next. All right. Just to give you a personal example, on my YouTube channel, there are hundreds of videos up, and people are free to leave comments. Some YouTube creators turn off the comments, which means you can't leave a comment, and I respect them for that decision. But part of the way YouTube works is everyone should be free to make comments, so I allow people to make comments. And I read every comment. I respond to none of them, because there's way too many to respond to, but I read them all. And there are so many comments that I can only laugh, because I'll give you, of course, by the way, I should first say that I'm overwhelmed by the number of good comments by the people who are really, really appreciative of those videos. That's the vast majority of the comments. And I'm so grateful that people are watching those videos and they're leaving good comments. That's all wonderful. But there are a few comments in the other category. And those comments are usually of two kinds. One is someone who, I don't understand this at all, someone who reads the title of the video, doesn't agree with the premise, and leaves an argumentative comment without having watched the video. You would be surprised how often that happens. Honestly, a lot. They don't bother they just want to make their voice heard. People have their opinions, and this is a venue for them to be heard. So, fine. That's why I leave the comments on, and they make themselves heard, and that's how it works. Okay. So I don't take any offense, but I do wonder why people wouldn't even bother watching the video. Oftentimes they'll leave a comment, a critical comment that is addressed in the video. So it's like very obvious that they haven't watched the video. Another very, very common kind of comment is one that is, we have a nice American expression. They are nitpicking. You know that expression? Nitpicking is, by the way, for people, many people will be watching this lecture from different places around the world. You may not know what nitpicking means. It means it's a synonym for fault finding. You go looking for what's wrong. Now, here's the issue. In any situation, you can find something wrong. Nothing is perfect. Look around here and you say, oh, that's not right. Look, that picture is crooked and there's some stain on the floor, and you go around looking at what's wrong. Yet, this is a beautiful lecture hall, but if you pay attention only to what's wrong, you get a really skewed view of what you're experiencing. And that's true for many viewers who watch my videos, not just my videos, and they listen to find things to argue with. This is very peculiar. Thank you. Let me give you an example. This is interesting. In early 1990s, before I was a sannyasi, I was already teaching Vedanta. I had weekly classes near our ashram in Pennsylvania. Every Tuesday, I'd go to Bethlehem Public Library and give a lecture. Every Thursday, I would go to the East Stroudsburg University. So this is my routine for many years, even before I took sannyasa. And I noticed in those days that by the way, in those days, I would have question and answer after the session. Usually the students were fewer, so 20, 30, 40 students. You can manage questions for that number of people. So at the end, there'd be a question and answer session. But I noticed in most of those classes, in the back row, they were all chairs. In the back row, there would be a line of men, no women, a line of men, all of whom had their arms folded like this. By the way, if you're sitting in the back row with your arms folded, I'm not talking about you. No reference to our present audience. I'm talking about Pennsylvania in 1990. All right, not now. So they'd be sitting there in the back row like this. And as soon as the lecture was over, as soon as I invited a question, they were all ready to challenge me. Okay. Now, during the lecture, sitting like this, were they listening to understand what I was saying, or were they listening for the sake of finding things to argue with? It's obvious. And that kind of represents some of the people who leave comments on my YouTube videos. They watch the video not for the sake of gaining wisdom, getting some tips on living your life of spiritual growth, understanding the profound teachings of Advaita Vedanta more clearly. They're not listening to that. What are they listening to? Any tiny mistake I might make. And I make plenty. I do. I think anyone who teaches, you make mistakes. You know, it's in a recent. I really got nailed by. I'll just share this with you briefly. In a recent Upadesha Sahasri class, I gave a brief overview of Buddhism. So 10 minutes. 10 minutes, very, very superficial. And then somebody, a scholar of Buddhism, watches only those 10 minutes and proceeds to give a long list of items that they found wrong from a scholarly perspective. I went through that list. Some of their arguments were absolutely correct. I make mistakes. Some of the arguments were not correct. They misunderstood what I was saying. Point is, I make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. So when you're listening to a teacher, should you listen waiting for the mistakes? What's the point? The point is, whoever is teaching is trying to convey something of value to you. If you are listening with that hypercritical mind, you won't receive that value, which is why this is not the time for big discussion about it, but it's always said that when you're listening to a teacher, Shraddha is required. Shraddha does not mean blind faith. Shraddha means an open mind more than anything else. Blind faith is the enemy of spiritual growth. I don't want to make this into a big topic. We're not talking about blind faith. There's no role in my opinion. There's no role for blind faith for a sincere spiritual seeker. But there is great importance attached to having some shraddha. So, in addition to these comments on my YouTube channel, you can also find other. Some people like making videos, and the purpose of the video is to attack. Honestly, attack videos. And even in the field of religion. I saw one just the other day. There's a Tibetan Buddhist, actually a Tibetan Buddhist with an American accent, but doesn't mean anything. I think the person has studied properly. Perhaps they've studied in India. I don't know her. I don't think anyone studies in Tibet. China won't allow it. But you know that in India there are many Tibetan settlements. And they have ashrams, monasteries, and Westerners go there to study, like in Darjeeling, where Dalai Lama lives. No, not Darjeeling, Dharamshala, thank you. See, I just made a mistake. Okay. Anyway, this Tibetan Buddhist sounds very intelligent. He makes what was the title of his Buddhism? The title of his video was, I just lost it. Where is that? Here it is. His title was, "Don't Be a Non-Dual Zombie." I must be a non-dual zombie. And it was all about, actually it was all about non-critical thinking. It was about this blind faith. And of course, in really non-dual teachings like those of Shankara is anything but against questions. It encourages questions. Anyway, just to give you an idea of an attack video, there are many. You'd be surprised. Christians attack each other in videos all the time. Different Christians in different groups attack each other. They're vicious. They're really, anyway. And Hindus aren't immune to attack videos. Some of you know of this Zakir Naik, Dr. Zakir Naik. Famous. He is a Muslim scholar who often attacks not just Hindus. He'll attack almost anything, but definitely he'll attack Hindus and Hinduism. And just an interesting statistic for you. He has 4 million subscribers on his channel, which is approximately 20 times as much as mine. So whose voice has more impact? So here he is, really flat out attacking Hindu culture. Now, this leads to a tricky situation. Excuse me. And the tricky situation is this. I've been speaking now for half an hour about not arguing. Should we not argue with those who attack Hinduism? Complicated. If we ignore attacks on Hinduism, aren't we violating the principle of ahimsa by allowing Hindus and Hindu traditions to be attacked? If we're passive, if we don't respond to those attacks, if we remain silent. So, not engaging with these attacks on Hinduism is, I believe this strongly, against the principle of dharma in general and ahimsa in particular. To allow your best friend to be abused by someone Is that dharmic? To allow abuse? Absolutely not. You get the message. But now, to make things more complicated, to engage those who fight against Hinduism, to engage in verbal warfare with them, is also a dharma. If you resort, and this is what happens, when they resort to disinformation and personal attacks, all of which are harmful, as we said at the outset, and then suppose you, not you literally, but you figuratively, if you respond with your own disinformation and your own personal attacks. Oh, this Dr. Zakir Naik is, he's like you start attacking the person, you start attacking the ideology, you start giving disinformation. This is what goes on in Washington, goes on in courtrooms, goes on in your living room, and goes on in YouTube and social media and in the mainstream media. It goes on everywhere. Our level of discourse when it comes to argument, the bar, so to speak, has really come down low. I think sociologically it must go up and down. I suspect there are times when it might even have been lower than it is today. But today it's quite low. The bar, so to speak, meaning what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And what is acceptable in this discourse is almost anything. Disinformation is acceptable. Disinformation is a nice way of describing lies. Disinformation is lies. Putting spin on things is not exactly the same as disinformation. People put spin on. If you look at the media, the left-leaning media puts one spin on, the right-leaning media puts the other spin on. I wish these two spins would cancel themselves out, but that's not how it works. So we are all subject to this bias in the media, on both sides, equally on both sides. So how to live in such a world and deal with all of this bias in the media and in social media, and in particular, how to deal with attacks on Hinduism. Plenty. Not just in social media. In academia, there's plenty. And in Indian universities, there's plenty of attacks on Hinduism. Social media, we've already described. Mainstream media, again, these twists, these spins, left or right. Anything and everything can be distorted and gets distorted. So how to defend something of great value? What is of great value, of course, is your own religious and spiritual traditions. We've already said that to fail to defend it is adharmic, but to enter into verbal warfare to defend it is also adharmic. What is the solution? The solution I'll share with you doesn't seem to be very popular, but it sure does seem to be reasonable. And that solution is, actually, the broader topic is how to argue. How about we start there? How to argue. The first step is the most surprising and most overlooked step in an argument, and that step is listen. This is like the people who comment on my videos without watching them. Watch them first and then give a comment. Here, the stereotypical, I'm sure you've seen comics, that this person is shouting at this person is shouting at this person, they're both shouting at each other. Who's listening? No one. What kind of communication takes place if both are shouting and no one is listening? Step one of any argument, listen. Because they may not be making a point that you agree with, but they are representing, well, I'm talking about your opponent, and let's be specific, someone who's attacking Hinduism. Someone who's attacking Hinduism, of course, you might feel emotionally offended, but if being emotionally offended leads you to get so angry, then you go on shouting and not listening. There's a first problem. Secondly, about listening. The person who's arguing may have a lot of flaws in their reasoning, probably do, but they are legitimately representing how they feel. Interesting. The factual content of what they're saying could be all bogus, but the emotional content of what they're saying is 100% real. Shouldn't you hear that? Shouldn't you understand, even if their arguments are ridiculous, shouldn't you make an effort to understand how they feel? That's the first step of an argument. You listen. While you listen, you hear the arguments, some of which might be legitimate, many of which may be illegitimate. But in addition to that, you pay attention to how they feel. Because if there's any hope in resolving the argument, that hope lies not in addressing the logical faults made in the argument. Hope might be found in addressing how the person feels. And often, people feel afraid. They feel attacked. And this, I didn't plan to talk about this, just two minutes on this, because it's such an important topic. Muslims around the country, around the world, many more traditional, more orthodox, and I know there are different groups of Muslims, we all know that. But the ones who are more traditional, more conventional, more orthodox, they feel attacked by Western culture, by modernity, by everything they see that is opposed to their cultural norms. Of course, they express their arguments in a religious and theological way, but bottom line is you can't generalize anything, but many feel attacked, they feel threatened, they feel afraid. When we focus on the content of what they say and ignore how they feel, we're making a mistake. There's that first step of listening. So what they say, you don't want to hear what they say, because it's all, if you're not Muslim, you're a kafir and all of this stuff, and jihad, all of this dogmatism and theology, they just pump it out at you and you get turned off. And I understand that. I understand why you would feel turned off by that. But why not make a little further effort to understand how they feel? Go beyond the dogmatism, go beyond the theology, go beyond the quotations from Quran. This applies equally to Christians and other groups as well. to understand and the general principle, when you're in an argument, don't just pay attention to the details of the argument, but the emotional aspect of the argument is equally important. That's step one, listening, to really understand their perspective. Step two is respond. You have a right to respond. They have a right to their opinion. You have a right to your opinion. And if they're expressing things that are harmful to your religious tradition and practices and spirituality, then you have a moral duty to respond, but respond how? We've already talked about some of the problems in arguing. So if someone is attacking the ideology of Hinduism, for example, many gods, and they go on attacking this many gods thing, that's called an attack on ideology. So then, if your response is to attack the ideology of Islam, you see the point? So if they are attacking your ideology, instead of responding by a similar attack, remember something called mutually assured destruction during the Cold War? We're not going there. Anyway, it's fighting like boys in the sandbox. Here's the point. If they are attacking your ideology, you don't have to attack theirs. Why not? You defend your ideology. That would make a lot more sense. Because in criticizing many gods, for example, then they obviously don't understand the essence of the Hindu tradition, which is not polytheistic at all. But they don't understand that. The point I'm making, though, is if they attack your ideology and you attack theirs, you just get into the shouting match. If they attack your ideology and your response is to defend your ideology, that's a proper argument. If they attack, suppose they use a lot of misinformation. That's something that you can address. So if they misrepresent something, you can give a correct representation without attacking. Here's the problem. If someone gives misinformation and then you turn it into an opportunity for a personal attack, how can you say that? Didn't you ever learn things properly? Are you an idiot or what? This is normal. This is what's been normalized in our culture. This is a problem. Anyway, the point I'm making is when you hear disinformation, if your response is to attack the person who's spouting the disinformation, that's not helping anything, even if they attack you personally. If they attack you as a person, and you respond by attacking them as a person, is back to the two boys in the sandbox hitting each other. So if they respond with disinformation, you have a responsibility to try to correct that information. And the next step, so we've given 2 steps, there's one more. First step, listen. And listen not just to the arguments, listen to the underlying emotions. Why are they making these arguments? Step 2 is respond to the issues. Don't respond with personal attacks. Don't respond in like. If they attack your ideology, don't attack theirs exactly. So you respond in a reasonable and measured way. But if they're shouting, do you need to shout? If they're really worked up and angry, do you need to get worked up and angry? To be honest, the more worked up and angry you become, the less effective you will be in making your points. Okay, final part, step 3. Step 3, perhaps one of the most important parts, and that is stop. It's over. Because the other person is not going to be won over by your reason and kindness and your absence of attacks. The other person is not going to, oh, now I get it. Never in a million years will that happen. To go on, what do they call tit for tat? Just to go on, like the two boys in the sandbox. Or the two, not wrestlers, boxers. One, you get hit, you hit back. Hit back, hit back. Not just useless. In fact, the main thing we've said all the way through here. It's harmful, not just to the other person, harmful to you. This is ahimsa. Not to subject others to harm, not to subject yourself to harm. If you don't stop, what will be the outcome? You won't win the argument, that's for sure. If it's about somebody attacking Hinduism, you won't win that argument. But if you go on arguing and arguing and arguing, are you really going to change the way the person thinks? Unlikely, very unlikely. In some cases, if it looks possible, absolutely. Sadly, that's not generally the case. Which means then if you proceed to argue, hit, tit for tat, etc., the outcome is more and more harm to you and the other person. You both get, I won't say emotionally injured, but you both get increasingly frustrated, increasingly angry, increasingly hurt, and it serves no good purpose whatsoever. So, so third step was stop. And my note here says, I should also stop my lecture. And we don't want to go on and on about this. But anyway, there's an important take-home message here, and that is, how do you handle arguments? Especially arguments that are attacking Hinduism, but not just arguments attacking Hinduism, any kind of argument. So those three steps are, as I said, they're not popular steps because no one follows them. No one follows step 1, listen. No one follows step 2, to argue fairly, without disinformation, without ideological attacks, without ad hominem attacks, attacking the person. So step 2, no one follows. And step 3, no one follows. They go on arguing. So these are 3 steps that can really transform any argument you get into. And some of it is, I don't need to say how important it is if you're like the arguments that take place in your living room, or arguments that take place in your workplace, at work. If you don't handle those arguments well, there are pretty nasty consequences at home, at the workplace, wherever it is where these arguments go on. So this is an important application of the principle of ahimsa, the principle of ahimsa being the central doctrine of Hindu dharma. What does it mean to be a pious, a dharmic Hindu? Let me use that term. What does it mean to be a dharmic Hindu? It means ahimsa, don't cause harm. And now we know, don't cause harm in the form of arguments. Even if you're 100% in the right, you can still cause a lot of harm, correct? You're arguing from a standpoint of being right, from a standpoint of righteousness, fine, but you can still cause harm. Okay, enough said. It says stop. So third step, stop. All right. So let me make some concluding comments here so you can go out and enjoy your lunch. First of all, I want to thank everyone who has helped, not just with this program, but with everything in the ashram. Everything here is coordinated by my assistant, Vasanti, and grateful to Vasanti. She's assisted by our 3 co-managers, Pinky Patel, Suresh Singh, and Jim Parmenter. So let us thank all of them. You may be grateful. I'm far more grateful because they relieve me of having to deal with all this management stuff. So I'm more free now to teach and to, I've been working a lot on these videos, which is also teaching. So I'm especially grateful to all of them. Let's thank all of the volunteers who, under Gopi's guidance, who got everything ready for this program and who stay back after classes on Saturday to clean up everything. Thank you all. Okay. And finally, I want to thank all of you. Thank you for, first of all, coming for this program, making it a wonderful celebration. Also to thank you for your donations. I feel particularly blessed in the fact that you have been so generous. I don't have to come out here again and again and again and ask for money. If we needed to, I would. I don't have to because you've been so generous. So I'm extremely grateful for that, for your generosity. Okay. To finish up here, some, what do they call this? Housekeeping. What a funny expression. So after we're done, we'll end in just a minute with Arati at the altar. After that, you'll go out to the lobby, wear your shoes, go out the back door of the lobby. Volunteers are serving food outside and water will be there. You can enjoy your lunch. And who should we thank for the good weather? We have excellent weather today. No, you don't thank a weatherman. Come on. I like that Hindi term, uparwala. Interesting word, for someone not raised in that culture, to. Anyway, I like the way that sounds. Okay. So not only can you enjoy your lunch outside and enjoy, but Jim has been maintaining these trails behind the ashram. Just go out the back right back here, and you'll find a lovely trail. You can go for 5 or 10 minutes. If you're ambitious, you can go for several hours. If you cross the stream, you can just keep going and going and going, and don't get lost. All right. Let me remind you, tomorrow, Sunday, we have our usual programs at 10 o'clock, our Vedanta class, Shankara's Upadesha Sahasri, followed at 11 o'clock by satsang. Come and join us for the satsang. After the arati, if you want, I'll sit out here for a while, and if you'd like to greet me before you go out to lunch, I'll sit here for a while. So thank you again, and many blessings to you all. We'll conclude with Arati. Om Gananahan Tva Ganapatigam Havamahe Gaving Gavinam Upamashravastamam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspatahana Shranvan Uttabasira Saranam Om Mahaganapataye Namaha Ishvaro Gururhatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtaye namaha. Vasudevasutam devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadguru. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.